Okay, so I guess we'll get started again. Sorry for the very quick break. So now we have session number 10, an agenda for change, which will be chaired by Thomas Alfstad. Thomas is an advisor to sustainable development strategies with the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. In this role, he supports the integration of quantitative analysis and modeling into national planning and policy formulation processes in UN member states. Tom, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Carla, and good afternoon to everyone there. And also, let me just start by congratulating, first of all the participants in the summer school for having completed the program, and also to organizers and everybody else involved, including the participants here today. So the topic or theme of this session is an agenda for change. So I suppose about 7 years ago, we had kind of a landmark or a couple of landmark international agreements. We had the Paris Agreement, and we had a launch of the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. And both kind of marked a change in international development agendas. The Millennium Development Goals that preceded them were more or less kind of conceived as an extension, or the goals were set more or less as an extrapolation of current trends. You didn't need to make any transformative change to meet them. You had to make progress in the areas where you had been making progress in the past. The SDGs and climate agreements made a departure from this by making goals that were sort of more aspirational and really set as, what we'd like to see necessarily than what we think is realistic. And they had another number of transformative elements to it. First of all, they were universal and they applied to everything. They were, as I said, more ambitious, not just, and they included, really things like, or it was a fully integrated agenda. It looked at the interplay, the interdependence of the environmental, social, and economic dimensions of development. It introduced concepts such as, equity and social justice through pledges such as the one to leave no one behind, really focused on things like multi-stakeholderism and so forth. However, now that we are approaching the halfway mark of the implementation period, we see we are kind of failing in a number of these areas. We're not really on track to meet these goals. We are, we're falling well short of being on track to meet the climate crisis. We see things like the unequal distribution of vaccines during the COVID pandemic, increases in income inequality. We have now a current food and energy crisis and kind of continued denial of basic human rights. So we are kind of failing to meet or to kind of get on this course that we'd set ourselves for, really this transformative change to bring about sustainable development. So now kind of focusing then more, I suppose, specifically on the energy and climate aspects of this, we're going to turn to a set of panelists who will share their views. So the first speaker, excuse me, is Emanuele Taibi from IRENA. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So thank you for your introduction, and let me just take a bit of a bird's eye view before I dive into what we do here, so planning and modeling for energy. So as you said, we really had a pretty major step change about 6-7 years ago now in the intergovernmental space when such landmark agreements were put in place, and we started making some progress. And as you said, however, we are now facing a variety of crises, all interlinked with each other. Of course, the climate crisis, the Paris Agreement is supposed to take care of that, but then of course we had a health crisis, and before that was resolved, now we have a security crisis. That is physical security, energy security, as well as food security. And then that, of course, triggered another set of issues, including an economic crisis, which is a stagflation crisis that we're seeing coming, that high cost of energy has a role to play in the inflation part, and in turn, the high inflation means the cost of capital for the investments we need in the energy sector is going to go up. So this is a really complicated situation. And I think what is probably the last and most important piece to try to address all of these interlinked crises is a leadership crisis. So we're seeing crises in leadership in many places. And I think the positive spin to that is that where somehow part of the public sector has been facing this challenge, the private sector has been stepping up. So I have the impression, at least, that there is leadership coming up in this situation in different parts of government, non-government, as well as private sector. So this, I think, has changed. If you see the participation to the COP meetings over the last few years, the diversity of the stakeholders participating has been a positive sign in the sense that more players are coming to the table to try to get to the targets that we agreed to in the Paris Agreement. Of course, I'm always going back to energy, but the issue is much broader than just energy. So one angle to that, investments in decarbonization, trying to reach net zero, will not immediately, but in the medium term, be able to reduce and address some of these crises. Of course, the climate crisis, but also, for instance, can create new jobs, can strengthen energy security and in turn maybe food security as well. And so there are potential solutions to this complicated crisis that might be a win-win situation, but as I said, we need leadership there. And leadership needs solid analysis. We heard it from the former Deputy Prime Minister of Thailand this morning. You need relevant analysis, you need quality analysis to be able to propose policy. One new element to the table, and I think this is somehow not so much triggered by climate, because that suffers from some delays between action and effect, but really the security crisis we're facing after the invasion of Ukraine. And I think that is key. I think we've been, a lot of us have been frustrated over the years by the speed not being fast enough. And I think we might be at the moment seeing an acceleration in how these changes might be playing out, in particular a contingent situation, a security situation might be giving us the speed we need for accelerating the transition. And there is a role for good analysis, good energy modeling to support bold policies. So it has to be not 10 years project, it has to be shorter projects, it has to be focused to the questions that the policymakers are having today on the table. We heard from the Commission this morning. There's a lot on their table these days, and they're reacting very fast. So the more we can support, the better from this community. And I think one important element is really that some of these transitions really follow a logistic curve, as you want to call it. So you need to get it on the exponential growth phase to get it going. After that, you cannot stop it. I was reading earlier today that last year, 4% of Netherlands houses has moved to heat pumps. So the whole stock, not the new installations of houses in the Netherlands. And last year, I was hearing it was not possible. Well, this year, 4% in 2021 have been retrofitted with heat pumps. Solar PV, this is happening in many jurisdictions every year. More and more, you see solar PV being the main source of generation. And I think this is a good sign. Electric vehicles are following suit. So good news there, but we need to push more jurisdiction, more technologies on this transition. A few more points really. So the policies honestly are increasingly there in more and more countries for more and more sectors. What is lagging behind is more regulations. And regulations are difficult because policies are setting the direction, and then you need to get the regulations to have solid analysis behind to quantitatively define what do we need to do next, how do we need to do it. You might have a one-page policy that gives a clear direction, you need 100 pages regulation with numbers to tell you how to do it and how quickly to do it. So I think this is another very important space where this community will play a role, so providing not only policy support but also regulatory support. And last point I wanted to make, the skills are required all over the supply chain as the energy transition unfolds. We need to requalify mining skills from coal to minerals that we need for the transition. We need manufacturing capacity to scale up quickly. I've been very busy with hydrogen in the last few years. We talk about gigawatts projects, and we have megawatts of capacity to produce the equipment we need. So if we don't get alignment between the manufacturing capacity, the finance, and the pipeline of project, we will not get the capacity we need in time. We need EPC contractors to learn to do the job. Everybody says heat pumps are great, but nobody is available to come and install it at my place. This is an issue, and we need universities and research institutions to support creating skills, as we heard, for instance, from Dinesh from Mauritius. You can see online, hi Dinesh, long time no see. Operational and maintenance. So working in a solar maintenance business is very different compared to a coal mine, and we need to requalify jobs. In Europe, the Commission is quite active on this. And end of life is very important. We need to recycle a lot of these products that we are producing, and this is an important element to circular economy. Finally, planning, national government planning, utility planning, very important role to play for modelers, energy modelers in particular. There is a gap of skills in that space. I think this is one of the places where you're feeling the gap. Probably the last part on that is to go back to the word fast. So we need fast implementation. So we need people that are able to move quickly as the regulations unfold to deliver the infrastructure that we need for net zero. And I think in closing, the importance of creating a platform for discussing assumptions and possibly share open models, as we discussed today, is also very important because it creates a dialogue between all the stakeholders I mentioned before, all the way through the supply chain, from policymakers, regulators, utilities, and even industry that says, I have the product for you, but I don't have the market, can we work together? So I think, again, modeling is a very good tool to get a discussion on assumptions, a shared vision for the methodologies, and of course, own the conclusions together. Thank you.
Thank you very much there for touching on both some of the broader issues such as leadership and also some more specific challenges for the sector. I think we're going to move on to the next speaker, which is Marcela Jaramillo. I hope my pronunciation is more or less on point. She's a senior associate of the 2050s Pathways platform, where she leads strategic engagement with development banks, building collaborative work in developing countries on long-term climate strategies. Marcela is also the co-chair of the Low Emissions Development Strategies platform for Latin America and the Caribbean. And previously she was at the Inter-American Development Bank, where she worked with governments to design net zero climate strategies and align public finances to climate goals. She was also a policy advisor on climate finance and diplomacy at the British think tank E3G. Please, Marcela, the floor is yours.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you very much. I just want to confirm if you hear me well. Yeah, excellent. So thank you very much for the introduction. Super excited to be here. I'm just going to quickly share my presentation. And I hope you can all see it now there. It's in the presentation mode. Right. So for this agenda point, I just really wanted to briefly share with all of you my experiences and some of the key messages I had working with governments in planning for change. So just to start that conversation, I really wanted to highlight this point, which I think is important that we are all kind of very clear when we start on this, and is that the question is not whether we should transition to net zero. And I think the evidence, and I'm pretty sure you have already have a lot of conversations on this, but the evidence is mounting, is very clear. Science has made it clear that we need to get to net zero emissions by 2050 to stop the climate crisis. We also know that many countries have already pledged or committed to reach net zero emissions, and many countries are currently working on plans to find a roadmap to achieve that end goal in that long-term time frame. And this will imply changes not only in terms of how do we address the climate crisis, but also changes in the way the world functions and the way the different countries position in this changing environment. So really, This transition will have implications also in socioeconomic areas, and it will be relevant for big, small countries, big emitters, small emitters. And finally, we also know that this transition is technically possible. There are many solutions out there that we know. We know what are the transformations that need to happen across all of the different sectors, including power, energy, transport, land, use of resources, constructions. And it's pretty clear as well, the evidence keeps mounting and mounting, that this will bring socioeconomic benefits, including knowing that prices of these technologies keep really going down very quickly, and that this will have also benefits in quality of life, productivity, biodiversity, health, and others. So really the question here that we're looking at and we're trying to address is how to go about this transition. And I would like to emphasize this because as part of my work, still most of my time goes in trying to move the questions of whether we should transition to how do we do it. This includes even having conversations with policymakers and technical teams about even considering the questions, doing the scenarios, and understanding what will imply and ask those questions that may look different, difficult or big. So one first message is I will encourage you all to be bold, ask the transformational questions, and really put the hat of problem solving. How do we go about it? And then to think a little bit about, okay, what this means is transformational work, which sounds like a big word. I often like to use this analogy, which I found really useful and I want to share with you, which is this idea of keeping always in mind that we are planning for transformational and not incremental change. So if we look at this in time and in emission reductions, the problem that we have often seen and the way that many countries have gone around this planning work is that they identify, okay, what we would like to do is to reduce certain amount of emissions over time. Let's say, let's reduce around 20% of our emissions in the next 5-8 years. And this is the project that we're going to be building. And we can see this, for example, as a house. This is a medium short-term goal, and this is where many people would put the efforts to really try to achieve this action, this target. But we now know, and it's very clear, and as I just shared, that what we know is that over time, by 2050, we really need to achieve 100% emission reductions. So we look at our end goal, it's very clear that what we're trying to build really here is a tower. So we really need to get to that end goal by around 2050. And if that is clearly what we know we need to achieve, what we should be doing right now is to build the foundations for that building and to really set the plan to go step by step to achieve that final goal and avoid time and effort in building houses that won't really get us to the final goal, which is net zero emissions by around 2050, and of course, prosperity and a just transition. So the issue here as well to take in mind, well, this is basically what I just mentioned. So climate policy should really be building right now the foundations for that just long-term decarbonization and not be thinking about how do we achieve a given level of short-term emission reductions on the lowest cost, which is usually the mindset. So we really have to change that mindset, and that is the mindset for transformational change. Now, building that tower can be daunting for many. It won't be the task of one person, not even one institution. It will require the actions of many actors, public, private, many ministers, international communities, civil society. So we really will need to work with all of them around this idea. And the issue here is that this idea can be daunting for them. They also have many other concerns and problems at hand, and many of them are very used to build houses, and they don't feel very comfortable about these huge tasks ahead that looks a little bit disproportionate. So what I think is that a key area of work for all of you, for all your expertise, to really help foster transformational change is to demystify the tasks ahead and help build consensus. To really help to understand what it means, what are the step-by-step that everybody will need to do in order to achieve that long-term goal that we all know that will bring greatest benefits for us. And that will include, as I'm sure you have already discussed, and I've heard in some of the sessions, the need to really listen and listen again to multiple actors and consider their concerns and their views in the way that you define research questions, analytical questions, and the way you really posing questions to the planning that you are doing. Really use all these tools to help clarify the milestones that need to be achieved in the long, medium, and short term. So we help to understand what are the actions, and we help to see from every perspective what do they need to bring to this building, what do they need to do over the time, and have this discussion with those key actors to codify with them and to build that consensus to enact and define the specific actions that will be required to take place. So this will be critical, having those conversations, building that consensus, and as I say, really demystifying the task, because it can be really seen as a daunting task. But always having in mind that we have an end goal and we have a building to build and not a house. So really ask those transformational questions. And then finally, just wanted to share this, maybe sounds, because it's an analogy, maybe sounds quite disconnected from reality, but this approach that I just shared with you is the approach that I have applied with many countries that I have supported in the development of the long-term strategies. And one of those examples is the case of the Costa Rica decarbonization plan, which was one of the first developing countries to present a long-term plan to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, and use these also to inform the short-term actions on climate, like the NDCs. This is a plan that really kind of clarifies the different actions over time and over sectors to achieve that net zero objective. It defines a roadmap by sectors of long, medium, and short-term actions that need to be taken with this idea of backcasting. So really the country and the technical team started thinking on the 2050, and they say we want a prosperity economy, a just and equitable society that is clean, and we want to understand what we need to do to get there. Just to give you a specific example, one of the key sectors that they really need to transform is the public transport. So setting up the goals, they defined that by 2050, what they really aspire to is to make public transport the #1 commute option, which is very far away it is right now, and to have 85% of public transport zero emissions. And what will mean for them is that by 2035, they will need to have at least 30% of buses electric. And then if they want to be there by 2035, the immediate actions that they defined under the government that was at the time in power was to start with a pilot of electric buses, update regulations on buses, on the concession of buses, and also issue a tariff applicable for electric buses, because even the formula that they used for calculating the public transport tariff was based on fossil fuel cars, and it wouldn't allow them to even consider electric buses. So this is an example of how to demystify the task ahead, because when you talk about making public transport the #1 commute option and being electric in a country where the public transport is really challenging right now, it sounds daunting. But when you identify that, okay, what we need to do now in the 3 or 4 years ahead to really get there is to make these changes that will be essential for us to get there. And then finally, just wanted to mention that as part of the analysis, the team, the technical work that was done, it was also shown how the decarbonization will bring 41 billion in net benefits to Costa Rica between 2020 and 2050, and really clarify all those opportunities that the country will be able to seize to this transition, to bring many people to the table and to start building that consensus. Sorry. And they also define around 70 immediate public investments and policy reforms to be enacted in the short term, as the one I just showed you, in the transport sector. And what that helped, having that clarity on the steps that need to be taken in the short term, that helped the country to raise $380 million in a policy-based loan that was packaged together with 10 million of technical assistance from the Inter-American Development Bank and the French Development Agency to help the country enact those immediate investments and policies that they identify. So really start taking the step towards that transformation. And this is just really an example of how this clear planning and understanding of the transformation that need to be taken really can help to mobilize some of the funding that will require to enact some of these changes. And this was a result of a very intense and excellent work from policy team, technical teams and modelers, really having conversations with many actors and building this plan together. So right now I continue to work with many countries across the world right now with the 2050 Pathways platform, expanding these kind of approaches to help countries to define those plans, to ask questions that may be difficult and to really find solutions. Recently, actually, I worked with the government of Guatemala, where the University of Costa Rica, that helped develop the plan in Costa Rica, trained two local universities in a methodological approach to help the government define a plan to net zero by 2050. And this is something that we see expanding, and things that are able to help answer questions like what happened to my fiscal revenues when I have to transition from a fossil-based economy to, for example, electric transport. And those difficult questions really have answers, and there are many ways to put solutions forward. But really, the important thing is to put the hat of we are doing the transition, how do we do it? So I'll stop there, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcela, for that. It's very interesting, and I like the analogy, building analogy. So we are maybe running a little bit short on behind time, so I'll jump straight to the next speaker, which is Mekalia Paulos, our colleague from another part of the UN Secretariat. She's a research officer in sustainable energy and climate change at the UN Economic Commission for Africa. Her work focuses on socioeconomic development, climate action, sustainable energy, and low carbon development pathways, particularly within the ongoing global energy systems transformation, primarily in the African region. She's one of the future energy leaders of the World Energy Council, where she contributes to publications on energy security, energy access, and climate action. So, Mekalia, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom, and a very good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and be part of this very significant event. Before I proceed, just to check that I'm audible and hopefully you can hear me well. Okay, great. So my intervention today is actually going to focus, in contrast to the two previous speakers, it will hone in more on some of our capacity building efforts in Africa, specifically within the energy space. So the discussion in this session has been coalescing around the need for transformative change, which, as you know, is essentially enshrined in the 2030 Agenda, the Paris Agreement, as of course, for my institution based in Africa, Agenda 2063. And these encapsulate visionary aspirations to meet the urgent development imperatives on our continent, and that energy and climate change are at the very heart of these endeavors is, of course, indisputable, especially to this community. Data, tools, and building the evidence base are fundamental levers in attaining these agendas, and notably in light of the ongoing global energy systems transformation and the need to accelerate the energy transition on account of climate change imperatives, strengthening capacity building efforts and reinforcing partnerships, as well as collaboration with other stakeholders in this realm will undoubtedly be pivotal. So to that end, ECA has been fostering capacity over the years and developing requisite tools to consolidate the data and evidence base, as well as building ecosystems of research institutions, universities, policymakers, and so forth, with a myriad of stakeholders, which I'll get to a little later, to synergize efforts and leverage comparative advantages within the sustainable energy space. There's not much time to outline the full gamut of our initiatives, but just to mention a few, we have been supporting member states with tools and capacities for integration of climate resilience and investments in critical sectors, energy being the main one, but also including water, agriculture, cities, ecosystems, and transport. This is essentially our AfriRes initiative, which I will get to at the end. We've also been building capacities for policy coherence and integrated climate, land, energy, and water systems, clues, modeling, and institutional coordination in support of the SDGs. Just to give you a bit of a taste, so Ethiopia is complete. Technical staff across ministries at the Ministry of Water, Irrigation, and Energy, as well as the Planning and Development Commission, have been trained and models developed with sectoral policy questions in support of the third growth and transformation program of the country. Cameroon and Namibia are currently ongoing, and their scope also to expand this to other African countries. Additionally, we're supporting member states with human and institutional capacities for long-term energy investment planning, including, of course, through our Africa Energy Modeling Platform, the EMPA, which will be the main focus of my intervention today. So the EMPA is a fairly recent initiative of ours, as well as the wider Optimist community, aimed at creating the critical mass of energy planning experts in African countries to support optimized investments in energy production and services so as to meet the continent's growing demand for sustainable, inclusive, and climate resilient development pathways, capitalizing, of course, on its abundant energy resources. The notion for this platform arose prior to COP21, driven by the deficit of capacity generally for energy modeling in Africa. We felt it was crucial to provide those working in the energy sphere with a better understanding of the energy landscape and how, in particular, the use of open source modeling and planning tools could help in addressing Africa's energy challenges. Moreover, the launch of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the AfCFTA, earlier last year, only shifts its energy demand into higher gear. And as climate action continues to gain even more credence amid the ongoing energy transition, with growing calls for Africa to define net zero emission targets, this only lends weight to the need for closing this considerable deficit in capacity regarding effectively using models and modeling tools for energy supply, demand, investment planning, and management. And indeed, as we're all aware, energy planning investment choices made today will determine development pathways for the next 30, even 40 years. So African countries need to strategically fashion their energy mix going forward without locking themselves in certain technologies that will not perform or end up investing in technologies that may be hard to finance while concomitantly seizing the opportunities that clean energy technologies offer, which, as we are aware, are enormous. And with every challenge comes an opportunity that we have to leverage. So these pivotal decisions need to be taken prudently and crucially with a long-term vision. The lack of long-term energy planning is often cited as one of the primary deterrents to energy investments on the continent in general. Hence, the EMPA aspires to bridge this gap between Africa's modeling needs and energy policy realities by harnessing open source tools and data to support African energy analysts, researchers, and by extension governments as they analyze policies and challenges specific to their respective countries in such a way as to ensure their energy resources meet national imperatives. And this is key, as local ownership is really essential. Although the EMPA acknowledges that different countries and regions within Africa will require context-specific approaches, the overarching objectives of the platform are to gather the energy planning and modeling community in Africa, to share experiences, models, data, support policy coherence through, of course, institutional capacity coordination and building for integrated energy modeling and investment planning, supporting the development of centers of excellence for energy planning on the continent, and to promote efficient and widespread use of open source modeling tools to support the SDGs, Agenda 2063, and of course the Paris Agreement. 3 rounds of the EMPA have taken place to date, 2018 in Addis, 2019 in Cape Town, and more recently 2021, which was completely virtual on account of COVID. And since its humble beginnings, where we only trained about 30 participants, we've been encouraged by and witnessed growing interest with resounding calls for more dedicated sessions. I believe the last one in December 2021, I think about 200 people applied, where we accepted about 100. But the trajectory seems to be, on the up and up. And open source modeling tools have been taken up with impressive scale, which is, of course, is very encouraging for us and our efforts. For those that are interested, the latest iterations actually have been expanded with 5 tracks: Onset, Osmosis and Flex Tool, FinPlan, Mead Energy Balance Studios, and finally, of course, tools. I won't get into the specifics of these, as I'm sure you're all aware of what these are, having gone through the summer school. And this culminates in a high-level strategic dialogue where we bring together government officials, representatives of international organizations, as well as expert community on planning and policies for national and sustainable development for 2030 agenda. And selected participants are then given the opportunity to showcase their work This is basically essentially a regional extension of the just concluded summer school that you have gone through. Crucially, the EMP is a collaboration of a lot of institutions, primarily led by the ECA, of course, together with the World Bank, UNDESA, GIZ, IAEA, IRENA, and the more academic institutions such as University of Cambridge, Oxford, Loughborough University, and of course, the CCG program. Because we truly do believe in the need for effective partnership and synergizing efforts with like-minded institutions, drawing on the expertise of both academia and international organizations. Such partnerships are really the very DNA of EMP, without which it would not be a success. Notably, the EMP is always co-organized with an African academic institution, which is key towards our building, centers of excellence and hubs as they arise, making that crucial link between academia and government ministries to reach that critical mass of policymakers and technical experts within the energy modeling and planning community on the continent. So far, we have co-hosted with the Addis Ababa University, University of Cape Town, and last year with the University of Mauritius. Again, to do away with that siloed approach and making the most of our various areas of expertise. Last but not least, I will quickly mention our Africa Climate Resilient Investment Facility, which was recently launched. It's an elaborate climate building, capacity building program that seeks to empower African professionals on climate resilience. Tom, how am I doing on time? Do I have a minute and a half or so?
Sure.
Okay, great. So AFRIMA is the joint initiative of the African Union Commission, ECA, the African Development Bank, and the World Bank, with support from the Nordic Development Fund. It essentially aims to strengthen the capacity of African institutions, including national governments, river-based organizations, regional economic communities, that's key, power pools, among others, as well as the private sector, basically project developers and financiers, to plan, design, and implement infrastructure investments that are climate resilient to climate variability and change in critical sectors, energy again being the main one, together with water, ecosystems, transport, and cities in Africa, to ensure return on investment in the present as well as future climate. It's a free training program which is premised on prioritizing data, tools, analytical support, and of course, boosting evidence-based policymaking. It was called for and seen as opportune given the inadequacy of technical capacity in planning for climate resilient investments in general, and more so as Africa rolls out intensive and mega infrastructure projects covering the aforementioned strategic economic sectors. Hence, in reinforcing evidence-based tools and capacity to close Africa's infrastructure gap, including, of course, energy, AFRIMA seeks to support member states on harnessing and monetizing resilience dividend, and of course facilitate wise investment decisions. At the moment, we have about 3 main modules that encompass climate science, evidence-based decision making, and resilient infrastructure design. And the curriculum framework entails training packages incorporating self-paced learning component, which comprises, recording pre-recorded lectures and assignments, including directed online learning tools, accompanied by interactive Zoom engagements. In-person learning with scheduled workshops on location are envisaged, hopefully soon, kind of within the comprehensive AFRIMA climate resilience course. I will leave it at that for now. Many thanks for your attention, and over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Mekalia, for all of that. There's a lot of details. Nice to hear about the activities, including some of our joint ones. So pleased to hear that. But we'll move on to the last speaker, which is Will Blyth. Will's a Senior Research Fellow with the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the Government of the UK. Please, Will, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tom. I don't seem to be able to switch on my camera. I've just been issued with a new laptop, so things not quite working, but hopefully you can hear me fine. You can see me? Oh, weird. Okay. I can't see myself, so I don't know how I'm looking. Anyway, that's fine. So thank you. I just wanted to cast our minds back a little bit to COP26, so only 6 months ago, but it seems like a long time. Just think about some of what seemed like important successes at that time and think about what's changed since. So one of the key sort of in the energy sphere, one of the key outcomes for COP26 was agreement in the consensus text to phase down coal. And that was really seen as quite a significant step to get every country in the world to agree to that. And it begs the question, how are you going to kind of achieve that in practice? And of course, that would never have made it into the consensus consensus text if it hadn't been for a lot of detailed work at individual country level with countries who are either using a lot of coal now or considering building new coal. And so I just wanted to point out the sort of role that planning and system thinking played in that process. There was a lot of detailed negotiation over a period of 18 months or more to get to that point. And it really just sort of highlights the policy kind of implications of the work that you've been doing in this summer school. Another part of the COP outcome that I was involved in and sort of dear to my heart was something called the Green Grids Initiative, which is really just thinking about the role of electricity grids in bringing together and integrating. I think my camera's gone off. Bringing together a number of elements of the energy system. So we all know, we need more renewables. There's new technologies like hydrogen storage, the role of demand side, flexibility, but also was talked about earlier, the role of electrification of transport, and all of this. Electricity needs to come together. That whole system needs to work together, and so grids is an essential part of that. And the Green Grids Initiative was a collection of over, I think, 80 or 90 countries signed the declaration, and it's really an attempt to bring countries together to think about how do they cooperate better, invest in joint infrastructure to make this happen and overcome a number of technical, financial and political hurdles to make this whole system kind of work in a reliable way. Now, all of that needs a lot of cooperation, and I think Tom alluded to the difficulty that the world is facing and has done for many years in coming together on these climate issues. And the events since COP26, unfortunately and very sort of depressingly, I think, have made that even harder and worse. But we also know that trying to do this, solving climate change individually as individual countries is at best going to be impossible, and or worst going to be impossible, sorry. At best it's going to be just a lot more expensive. So we've got to find ways to continue to work together. And I just wanted to sort of leave with some parting thoughts about the importance of the work that you've been doing in the summer school, not only on the technical function of trying to understand, how to make these systems work better and reliably, and alluded to the sort of essential role of planning in that. But I think also the spirit of cooperation and the relationships that you build through that process and this international cooperation and the number of organisations that have been brought together to deliver this kind of programme, I think is absolutely essential. And there's a sort of hopefully a soft power element to this, which can build on those relationships going forward, and hopefully we can regain and strengthen the ability for us all to work together in the future to solve this. So I'll leave my comments there. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much, Will. So yeah, maybe a brief. Just let me check. So I just a brief check with the people in the room. So I understand we might have the CEO of Sustainable Energy for All joining in a bit. Will someone interrupt me if we need to go to her? Or if there's any update on the timing? Okay, thank you.
As soon as she's here, we'll send a message. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I see we have a couple of questions that have been posted by participants. I think the one submitted first is by Anonymous, and the question is, overall, has COVID-19 helped or hindered net zero aims? So I suppose taking that kind of into the topic of this session is, what does that mean? Has that meant for, I suppose, structural or transformations? what's your views? Has kind of the changes towards remote work, reductions in travel and so forth, weigh any kind of reductions in investments and so forth from related economic crises? So anyone who wants to weigh in on this? Will? You're muted.
Just give a very brief thought on that. I mean, I'll come back with a classic sort of on the one hand, on the other hand answer. I mean, I think the experience of international collaboration on identifying solutions, technical solutions, working really fast on that was an incredible lesson for the ability of countries to work together, thinking, outside the box, working across boundaries. I think that's really inspirational. Coming back to the point I made earlier about the ability for human beings as a sort of species to cooperate, I think that was really heartening. I think that the depressing element to it is the lack of ability to really then apply those solutions more broadly and globally and come to equitable solutions. And so I think there's both positive and negative lessons there for us in thinking about perhaps that's a longer term problem that we have to face with climate. Thanks.
Thank you. I have Mekalia first and then Marcela.
Thank you, Tom. Just very quickly, that's a double-edged sword question, actually, because again, it's yes and no. I think to a certain extent, COVID-19 shifted this whole, the climate. We have a serious emergency. We can't delay any further. We really have to move towards a clean energy future. I mean, that had been the global energy transformation has been happening even before COVID-19. But I really think after COVID-19, this whole green recovery, when we recover, when we build back better, we have to do it green. We have to move to net zero as soon as possible. So in that respect, I think there's been a greater appreciation of the urgency and kind of the trajectory. So I think that helped. But the challenge, at least for us in the African space, has been reduced fiscal space. For a lot of the countries in Africa, a lot of countries are in serious debt distress now. Over 25 or 26 countries are in serious debt distress, brought about and kind of reinforced mainly by the COVID-19 recovery. So we go to countries and tell them about the importance of even in their energy mix, how you have to increase the presence of more renewable power, clean energy technologies within that mix. And people, some of the countries tell you, what are we transitioning from? We don't even have basic energy. You're telling us to transition. Where's the financing from? Basically, show me the money and then I will do net zero, no problem. And you have some of these countries thinking even going long term on oil and gas, which of course is, I mean, you've got the whole stranded assets issue. Is that the right thing to do? I mean, of course, for us in the sustainable energy space, of course it's not. But COVID-19 is really complicated that dynamic. So yes and no, and we just have to keep on, I guess, the messaging and kind of the importance of whether we like it or not, we have to transition. It's not really a question of, whether we should. It's really a question of how, what's the scale, the speed, who's going to pay for it, and kind of figuring that out. So yes, it's yes and no, I would say. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Mekalia. Marcela was next, but I think we were just joined by Damilola Ogunbiyi, so I'd like to take her intervention first, if that's okay. So first of all, welcome very much, and thank you so much for joining us. Damilola is the chief or the CEO of Sustainable Energy for All. She is the special representative of the Secretary General on Sustainable Energy for All and co-chair of UN Energy. So please, thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me. I have short interventions, and I will let you go get on with the program. So let me start by offering my congratulations to the cohort of students here today from the Imperial Summer School. You should be very proud of what you've achieved so far and putting through this rigorous process. Well done so far, and everybody who took part in making this day happen. Back home in Nigeria, where I'm from, we say that the reward for good work is more work. Now that you've made it this far and excelled in your program, your reward is a responsibility to take what you've learned and make sure it gets into worlds and you actually make change on ground. The challenges we face today in the world are quite daunting, but they're also exciting because it means that we can put true innovation at the test. These days that we have kind of rampant misinformation spreading across mass and social media, the ability to generate, analyze, and take decisions based on quality and accurate data is critical. And we all need to work together to make sure the right data is analyzed, but more importantly, you put it in the right way for policies to actually change. This is something that I take very seriously as Sustainable Energy for All, and it's reflected in my work. We support countries develop universal integrated energy plans that don't only look at electrification, but how to integrate clean cooking. We also do things like integrating kind of energy transition plans. A lot of people, and I think it was said in the call earlier that everybody wants to transition. But the truth of it, coming from Africa, you really can't talk about transition if you don't talk about energy access, if you don't talk about industrialization, and if you don't talk about development. And that has to be part of the energy transition journey for countries like Africa. You have to look at sectors like power, transportation, industry, and people don't like saying it, but oil and gas, and identify projects and policies that require economic development and carbon neutrality. We are really lucky at the period where we are. We had a SE4 forum in Kigali just 2 weeks ago. It feels like a couple of months. And someone said, why don't we transition into energy first? And what it means is that, continents like Africa, especially SSA, is starting at such a low base that we can actually have a low carbon pathway. But people have to be centered, when we talk about energy transition. So as all of you start applying your learnings in your home countries and continue to foster the spirit of collaboration, it would be really, really great if you could reach out to me, if there's any way that we can help you at the UN, take your learnings to another level or help you within your different countries. It's really all about collaboration, but more importantly, about putting people at the center of everything and making sure that we leave no one behind. So let me congratulate you all once again and look forward one day to meeting some of you in person. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that message, and you have some very important points there related again to what we did, this transformative change we've been discussing here. So with that, we had Marcela was next up for her intervention. So I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Thomas, and very, very nice to hear these words. Actually, from all the panelists, it's really exciting to hear you all. Mekalia said everything I wanted to say, but I just wanted to add something else to that, which is, I think the pandemic really showed how vulnerable we are to changes and how the status quo can change quite quickly. And I think that opened the mind to many people to, okay, we can do changes, we can make bold decisions, and we can all come with solutions. But also showed how some of the vulnerable people that we know will be more impacted by climate were the more impacted by COVID. And for example, in my country, I'm from Colombia, and in many Latin American countries, and I know other developing countries, some of the people that were more hardly impacted were those in the informal sector. They just live working in the street, and they couldn't make a living. So I think this really highlighted precisely what you were just mentioning, the social aspect of it, the people, and how do we need to work to really help in the transition and really keep in mind those people that will be probably more vulnerable in this transition. But just leave it there, just to add to what was already mentioned.
Thank you very much, Marcela. We are running toward or approaching the end of our time slot here. There is one more question posted online that I'd like to give the panelists a quick chance to respond to, and it's says, how can modeling balance support for short-term decisions and long-term planning? So I suppose again that this comes back to maybe to the to Marcela's also example with the buildings. How do we kind of then do plan for the skyscraper when we need to make small or decisions in now essentially? So and the role of modeling in that, I suppose, is the question. So I'll open the floor. Yes, Emanuele.
Let me try also to connect it to the previous question. So, of course, COVID-19 had a massive impact on energy, as in many other aspects of life. But I think if you take the opportunity of having the CEO SC for all in this session, you take the SDG 7, you split it in the three-dimensional energy efficiency, energy access, and renewables. So if you look at energy access, it's a very negative impact. We lost a lot of progress made. So this is very sad, and we need to think about ways to recover all the progress that has been lost. In terms of efficiency, we learn to be more efficient. So somebody's going back to the office 100% of the time. That is unfortunate, but others learn that you can do better than that. And maybe the new normal is 3 times a week, and that is already reducing a lot of energy for commuting. We are flying less, which is a good thing. We are mostly having a visual panel, and only one sitting in the room today. But I can tell you most of the time, every day, I'm in visual panels, and that has been saving a lot of emissions. So efficiency definitely benefited, and I think renewables is also positive. So we heard a lot of stakeholders saying, no, you cannot do too much variable renewables will break the system. Well, the demand dropped and renewables were the same. So the share of renewables has been much higher than what people thought they could manage, and they did manage. There were no major outages that we can think of during the period of low electricity demand due to COVID-19. So I think we have some positives and some negatives, and it's very complex. It goes back to the question you just asked now. So how do you plan for contingencies, electricity prices and gas prices that are sky high levels today, oil prices as well? What's the long-term vision? So 2 things, you can look for short-term solutions. You look for LNG instead of pipe gas and continue business as usual, or you turn that money into investments and you decarbonize faster. So I guess I don't have to tell you what's better, but if you don't look at the medium to long-term objectives, you only look at short-term solution, you will take wrong decision that will turn into stranded assets.
Thank you very much. We are more or less at the end of the session. I have each of the panelists have their hand up. So I have Marcela, Will, and then Mekalia. So if we can try and maybe do it in a minute each, and so we can wrap up the session roughly on time, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. So I think the key here is not about whether we should focus efforts on looking at the short term or the long term and how do we balance those efforts. The key here is to inform short term in the context of long term, because we know it's very clear what we need to do, where we need to go, what is the time frame, what are the transformations that need to happen. So I think an important element of your abilities, your skills, and maybe just underlining the idea of the building is to really help understand how that transition looks in the long term and help to understand what are the different steps that need to be taken towards that. And that is very important, because if we don't do that with the vision of where we need to be there at the end, and it's not only just emission reduction, and it has been said, it's also about quality of life, about equality, about people. If we don't have clarity on that, what will happen is that we will make wrong choices now that will seem cheaper, but it will be more costly when we are in 2030, 2035. Or we realize that we missed a very important decision that needed to be taken now. Like, for example, we need to build, I don't know, let's say a train for moving people in the country that will really facilitate, economic, social, and GHG emission reduction. that will require time for planning. So we really need to start making those decisions now. So maybe we have that frame ready in 10 years. So this is the important thing, is informing the short term in the context of the long term. And your role will be really helping to understand that context.
Thank you. Will.
Thanks, Tom. Totally agree with that. I'm just going to reflect Damilola's point that the reward for good work is more work. I think that is certainly true for planning. You never produce a plan that you then stick to for the next 15 years. That's not how it works. You constantly revise. I think energy security nearly always trumps climate change in the short term, but that doesn't mean to say that progress on climate and decarbonisation doesn't progress over a longer time period, and both of those progress in parallel. There was another question about net zero, whether it's truly feasible, which I think is really connected to this question. I believe the answer is yes. I think it needs to be proven by the richest countries in the world. I believe the logic, the economic logic, will prove itself in the long run, given the lower cost of renewables compared to fossil fuel. But there's technical challenges that need to be overcome to achieve that, and there's time for countries to find that pathway and adjust that pathway as they go along. So that planning process is one of constant change. So you've chosen a career that will keep people busy, I think, for many years to come. Thanks.
Thanks, Will. And then Mekalia, please.
Thank you, Tom. Just super quickly, because I know we're running out of time. Just to echo everyone's responses, very, very true. What really resonates with me in this whole, transition narrative and debate, etc., is people think, or countries think, I believe, that we have a choice. And the sad fact of the matter is we really don't have a choice. And there's been so much data coming out month after month, not just from the IPCC, the World Meteorological Organization, even just basic rudimentary data that keeps on telling us there really is a serious emergency, and we have no question. We have to transition. It's going to cost us more if we don't than we do. So sadly, short-termism and, governments need to be elected. There's serious imperatives that you need to do right now. Therefore, that short-termism sadly comes up. Kind of takes precedence, and even within the recovery efforts that we saw, a lot of the spending, the green stimulus funding, a lot of it went to more rescue as opposed to long-term recovery. Sadly, it was taken up by that. But again, we really have no choice. And energy planning, it's too important to be kind of taken up by that short-term vision. You need to have that long-term vision. There really is no choice. And the sooner we realize that, as difficult as it is, I think, the easier it would be for everyone. Thank you. Tom, back to you.
Yeah, I think somebody that frozen already is so deep in thought.
I thought the problem was.
I think we'll close off at this point and move on to the next session. Just to thank the speakers very, very much. It's really nice to have these conversations and to start to just build all of this momentum. It's also been brilliant to have Damilola come on and make that intervention. So if I just ask everybody to give the speakers a warm round of applause.
Thank you. Bye.
And we'll move on to the next session. Thanks very much. And I believe Taco is.
Yeah, Taco is the chair for our closing remarks. And Taco is assistant professor at Simon Fraser University School of Sustainable Energy Engineering. His research focuses on improving tools for nexus modeling, including expanding the clues and osmosis modeling tools. Current research includes consideration of short-term storage and long-term models, life cycle impacts of different electrification pathways, and incorporating justice and equity consideration into modeling tools. He's also very interested in the connection of these tools with the policy decision. When not working directly on modeling, he enjoys researching wind power on his sailboat. Taco, over to you.
Thanks, Anna. as this closing session, I think the interesting thread that I've been hearing through the whole day today is we're building foundations. We need to build a skyscraper, and what we've been doing in this school has been building foundations, where we have a whole group of people that have now got tools to build foundations with. And they are from all sorts of places around the world, and that's what this school has been doing. And I think the school has been building foundations for keeping going and working further. And we've built foundations with individuals and organizations and groups in different countries. And that's what I feel a large part of what we do is about building those foundations. So with that thought, this is our closing session. I don't want to keep you away from any activities or anything after that. So I'm going to pass it on to Adrian. Adrian is a researcher here at ICTP. His research is related to metrology and how different weather systems affect disease vectors in Africa and different places. I'm trying to remember all this. And I know, but I won't read it. I know enough about Adrian at this point. He also enjoys researching wind power on SLO. And so I will pass it over to Adrian to give us first and closing remarks.
Okay, I don't want to speak too long, but I did want to actually make a comment about this particular approach to this sport. So one of the things that is quite difficult at ICTP is that we have very few faculty, and there is a tendency to stretch it out too thinly. And so we find it very difficult sometimes to, for example, retain an activity and build up over time. There's always this should we say, choice that one has to make. I, for example, in my research focused on what I've been at ICTP very much in the African continent. I've been many times, I've been lucky enough to go many times to various workshops and projects funded from various sources, especially by the European Union, on the continent. And one of the difficulties I've had is that it's given me many opportunities set up, shall we say, relationships with different groups, whether in West Africa, East Africa, also in Malawi. But it's very difficult to sustain those relationships. And I think one of the things actually with this school that's been very successful is it's built foundations and it's built them up over time in groups. It's made sure that with each of these groups there's critical mass, and it's built on that from year to year. And so I think actually that's why it's really been a flagship enterprise and undertaking within our ICP, should we say, the word I'm searching for, ecosystem, should we say, of training. So I think that's something where it really has to be applauded, and I think it's something that actually ICTP should at least taking note of, because I think it's something where maybe we should also perhaps try and target some of our activities in a small number of groups, perhaps return to those countries more often, and not try and always be so widely spread. So I just wanted, that's something that's really kind of struck me when I've been following this as a, should say, a local contact point for the years we've just been running. I think I'm going to hand back to you because I don't want to kind of hold the floor too much, but it was just something I wanted to say that I think is really a strength of this, and also the should we say, the connection with the policymakers during the high-level meetings, which I think I know from all of you that it's not an easy thing to organise. It takes a lot of work, and I think that has to be applauded as well, how that's been achieved and sustained. So it wasn't just a, should we say, a 1 year addition to the school. I'll hand back.
So before I hand the mic to Mark, who's going to thank a bunch of people, I'm sure, in the closing statement, as part of his closing statement, I want to also ask everyone to give a big round of applause for Mark for all the effort and work he puts into this school and the work that school has. I'll hand my mic over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move this away from the good-looking chap on the side over there. Yes, I'm going to say a lot of thank yous to a lot of people. The first one that I do want to say, for everybody that's online, as well as folk in this room, who very kindly shuffled up to make the camera angle better, just to say, having Damilola come along is huge. This is somebody at the same level, so head of state, minister, and basically just, she knows how important the work is that you guys are all doing. And, I think that was a very genuine appeal for folk. If you want to take this further, you've got to own it and push it and knock on doors and people will open them. There's a lot of people out there. So I just want to acknowledge that. First off, I have the difficult thing, if I write a list of people to thank on my laptop, but I lock myself out of my laptop and I can't sign in with one hand. It's extremely Thank you. Brilliant, thanks, Tango. And I can't multitask, so doing that was good. So there are a bunch of thanks to be given. I'd like to start off by thanking all of the folk that took part on this school. For those who don't know, just doing the entrance exams and so on to get in, it's a good 20 to 30 hours worth of work. And everybody's a busy person and, in an important position. We reviewed all of the applications and, it's just the caliber of everybody's outstanding. It's a privilege to be able to work with you. The next set of thanks is critical is for all of the organizations that have been involved. And there are a lot. So we've got Simon Fraser University, I'll come back to the ICTP in a second, but KTH, the Open University, Optimus Community, the UNDP, International Atomic Energy Agency, International Renewable Energy Agency. I don't think many people think about those two in the same breath. Sustainable Energy for All, GIZ, Cambridge University, Imperial College London, UNDESA, the World Bank, ESMAP in particular, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Loughborough University, the Centre for Global Equity, University of Mauritius, University of Oxford, and I mentioned ESMAP. And it's the case that without all of those organisations, this would not happen. And trust me, it is near miraculous to find so many like-minded people that want to do something to make this change. And it's I don't know, you guys, the same metaphors. I think this is the little brother underneath the boat. I think modelling is the kind of thing that's really important because it helps to set direction. And then finally, I would like to thank, not quite the penultimate, I'd like to thank the ICTP very much. David, thank you so much for hosting.
Especially the local secretaries.
Yeah, I'm going to, thank you so much for hosting this. Also, ICTP that opened their doors to us. And it's a nice venue. Next year, you're going to talk to the jellyfish just a little bit. But apart from that, it's just been brilliant for those who've been able to make it. And thank you for everybody online, also for the IT facilities so that we can connect. So, as I say, next year, we're hoping to have this as a super hybrid kind of event. Big thank you to all the tutors and students and experts that have come along. It's great to have you here, and thank you for putting your hand and shoulder to the plow. Yeah, and then finally, I would like to thank the people that did all the heavy lifting and organising for this. And it's certainly the case that Victoria in the office back there, as well as a couple of others, Carla and Naomi, and then Rudolph. Yeah. You guys did a phenomenal job. Thank you very, very much. And it's super dynamic as well. As soon as they noticed that there was potentially space to get more tutors in and so on, just to move quickly. And again, the ICTP is phenomenally flexible with us all the time. That's something we take lightly. Thank you very, very much. All right, so with that, we started this off with there was an expression, an African expression, but it's something like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Damilola put the challenge forward better than anybody else. The door's there. Start knocking on it, start opening it. And together, I think we're going to make the kind of change that future generations are going to be very grateful for, and we're going to be grateful for too, because those generations are going to get our legacy. So thank you very much. And I think, as chair, I'm going to hand back to you to officially close.
Okay, and I think that's a really nice point that Mark came up with. It is future generations, and I'm here partly because of my kids. I know Mark has a couple of young kids, Adrian has a few, or has a young kid, and so it is about the next generations and the future. And so let's go forth, build some good foundations, and end up building that big tower that we're going to get to and solve these issues. Thank you, everyone, and we will call it a day.